Hello, and welcome to Get Growing with Jordan. It's the summer of 2021, and I have lots of new things growing in the garden this year. Come on, let me show you.
Coming up next on Get Growing with Jordan.
It's a bloody hot July day, and I'm out in the garden giving you the tour of a lifetime. I'm so excited to show you.
Stepping into your very own perfect garden is something that many of us only dream of. But in this series, Jordan shows you that it's pretty easy to make these dreams become a reality. Welcome to Get Growing with Jordan.
The backyard garden has evolved since last year. I've taken out the old chain link fence, dug out all those nasty blackberries, and the plan is to continue these garden beds all the way down so that next year I can grow a lot more. I've taken composting a lot more serious this year. In the fall of 2020, I moved all of the leaves that I had, bagged it up and put it in this compost. I've also put fresh grass clippings in there, and together that makes a nice recipe for compost that I can use in the spring of next year. So these are the potatoes, red potatoes to be specific. They were planted with seed potatoes in fabric pots. Big fan of fabric pots, just like last year. And look at them, they just started bursting up out of the soil, and they grow these pink, purplishy flowers, and that's a sign that they're starting to produce the new spuds. Once the leaves start dying back into a yellow leaves, similar to the lower ones down here, that's when it's time to start to harvest. I could dump the whole thing and get some early potatoes. They'll be small little spuds, but I'll wait till the fall. This year's bok choy harvest is looking pretty good compared to last year. I have two types of variety of bok choy. I have the Shanghai bok choy, and I just have the regular bok choy. It also goes by the name of pak choy, but I prefer calling it bok choy. One of the problems I have this year are the white moth caterpillars. They'll lay the eggs on the underside of the leaves, and then you have those green caterpillars that come through and eat little holes through them. So from last year, I had two raised beds on top of each other, so it was a higher raised bed. I've compressed it down to one, moved it over to the side, and I've added a new stable trellis that I'm growing something new. These are the cucamelons. Cucamelons are actually a cucumber, not a watermelon. But they look like tiny little watermelons that get about an inch tall. When you eat a cucamelon, it tastes kind of like a lime and a cucumber mixed together. And my reasoning for growing these instead of regular cucumbers is that it grows in abundance, just like cherry tomatoes. And if a squirrel or a chipmunk comes to eat one, then at least I'll have a few more that will be growing continuously. So this is a cherokee purple tomato. It's an indeterminate tomato, but I'm growing it in a different style this year. So this has a string that's tied to the base of the tomato, and it's growing straight up with the string right tied up to the top of this fence here. And that's called the cordon method. Now I've let a couple suckers grow on this because I have the cage around it, so it's gonna get a little bit bushy, but I'll leave the single stem growing up to the top. This year, I have accepted the challenge of growing loofahs in the garden. Many people think loofahs grow in the sea, but actually they're a type of squash. As you can see, this loofah, which are 4 plants planted here, are growing up this strong supported trellis. And it can grow up to 30 feet long, and I'm gonna have it arch over top and grow down to the other side of the trellis. I'm hoping that I can get some large loofahs, and my plan is to dry them out, cut the loofahs into sections, and give them out as Christmas gifts for little scrubbies. I've grown all of my curly kale this year from seed myself. The only downside with the kale this year is the same thing as last year. It's those white moth caterpillars. They lay the eggs on the underside and they just hatch and turn into these green caterpillars that eat them away. This year I have lots of purple basil, and my plan is to harvest all of the basil and make some nice pesto. I also have some Thai basil, which has a very licoricey scent to it. I don't really know what to use it with. I think it's mainly used for Thai dishes and a couple Indian curries, but that's not my usual forte for cooking. I have dill as well, which I'll dehydrate and use that for any kind of fish dishes. And I have regular sweet basil as well. This year, I've decided to continue growing some autoflower cannabis plants. This year I'm growing the gelato and the diesel. These are trained with some low stress training. And essentially that means I slowly bent the nodes that were growing out the sides into a position so that optimal light could get to them. This has caused these branches to reach up for the sky towards the sun and start forming its own new buds. It's in the next phase of its cycle, which is the budding phase. And you can tell this by the white little fibrous hairs that are starting to grow on each of the buds. These are my super sweet 100 hybrid cherry tomatoes that I'm growing this year. These can get a maximum of 12 feet tall. I put these old fence posts into the ground, and I'm growing these 3 tomato plants using the Florida weave method. The idea with the Florida weave is that you have a single stem with an indeterminate tomato growing straight up, and you pluck and prune all of the suckers that grow in between the leaf nodes and the main stem. What makes this variety so unique is that it can grow up to 100 tomatoes on a single cluster. As you can see, this cluster is already growing multiple branches, and my goal is to have at least 100. Here she is, the brood queen, or the Brugmansia, also known as the angel trumpet. This is a very toxic plant. It can be hallucinogenic if ingested, not to be messed around with. As you can see this year, it's producing a lot more leaf nodes compared to last year, and there's no sign of flower pods yet. That is probably because I fertilized it with a more nitrogen-based fertilizer in the spring. And now I'm transitioning it over to a more potassium-based fertilizer so that it can start to produce the flowers. I have 2 different varieties of canna lilies this year. These are the canna lilies. This is the traditional one that I had last year that produces a nice red flower, and it will die back and produce little seed nodes, and you just cut those off. Over here, I have the African sunset canna lily. It hasn't started producing any flower nodes yet, but when it does, it's supposed to be a very vivid gold flower. I can't wait to see it. Oh, you've discovered my cactus. My papa gave me this, and I've transplanted it in a nice little terracotta pot, but sometimes it can be a little bit of a prick. As you can see, I have lots of projects going around in the garden this year. Hopefully, by the end of the summer, I'll have lots more to show you. Make sure you comment and subscribe to Get Growing with Jordan for all the latest tips and tricks in the garden. Until next time, keep gardening and have fun.
Have you got a garden-related question? Post your question below and it may be answered on an upcoming video.